Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra, where I give you the juicy nuggets concerning the war in Ukraine to give you extra context and something to stimulate thought and discussion in the usually very constructive comments threads under my video. So thank you for that. So we're going to go to something that I was going to talk about yesterday, but ran out of time. So this is from Mick Ryan, the Australian retired general. We're talking about winter. Winter is coming, and it may have an effect on, well, it will have an effect on both sides. I guess the question is which side will profit most, or maybe not have the greatest loss or challenge from winter. So this is what Mick Ryan says. The winter months approaching Ukraine, it will have an impact on the war, but it won't shut the war down as some have theorized. A thread on the likely impact of the winter war. So recently it's become common to compare the coming winter in Ukraine with the Russo-Finnish winter war fought from November 1939 through to March 1940. The Finns resisted a massive Soviet invasion of their nation, resulting in a peace agreement temporarily ending hostilities. The winter war is used as a historical example of David versus Goliath, as well as a clever use of terrain and weather by a defending military force. But it also offers another important lesson for observers of the war in Ukraine. Wars can be fought and battles can be won during the most extreme weather, including the depths of winter. Both the Russian and Ukrainian strategies are predicted on a continuation of hostilities over winter. However, they will have different approaches. For Russia, their aim is to draw the war out over winter and well into 2023. So just to talk about that, one of the strategies for Russia and for Putin, as many analysts think, is that the longer he draws the war out, the more bored, costly, cold the feet will get for the allies and those supporting Ukraine. So they prolonging the war, as far as Russia is concerned, is a great strategy for winning the war. Just as we will have other things to spend our money on, especially given a likely global recession. China seems to be imploding right now, or just about to implode economically, as has been predicted for a good year or so plus. So if there's a global recession, we're not going to be so prepared to spend our money on this war, and that will really profit the Russians. So stringing it out for as long as possible is one of their aims, arguably. Both the Russian and Ukrainian, a key element of this is the insertion of masses of newly mobilized troops into Ukraine that stabilizes the front line. But the most important aspect of Russia's strategy for winter is its strategic energy warfare. Putin's energy war, which has already affected 30% of power generation capacity in Ukraine, will see heating restricted, more burst water pipes, and a range of other hardships for the population. While stockpiling of warm clothing and firewood commenced some time ago, many Ukrainians are either displaced from their homes or living in damaged residences, making them more vulnerable to the ravages of winter. The denial of heat by Putin during the coldest months of the war is a deliberate strategy to both terrorize the population and to pressure the Ukrainian government for either a ceasefire or some other accommodation with the Russian invaders. But as we've seen from the hardy Ukrainians, their resilience, I don't know what happened there. As we've seen from the hardy Ukrainians, their resilience and very high support for expelling the Russian army means that this is an unlikely outcome for Putin. Putin by now probably hoped that his strategic energy warfare would have had a greater impact on the populations of European nations that had become reliant on Russian energy. I talked about this yesterday with the fact that Europe has pretty much got 100% of its gas reserves for the winter. It's done an amazing job of not only replenishing those reserves with other sources, but also in cutting gas usage. So I use the example of certain German firms who have cut their usage, and these are huge manufacturing firms that apparently use as much gas as like small nations, have cut their usage by 50%, even though they were worried at the beginning of the war that this would screw them over. So, that means that the Russian objective there has somewhat failed. However, a combination of new energy sources, it seems to be talking about it here, rationing and stockpiling means that Putin has not yet been able to exert leverage over Europeans to reduce their support for Ukraine. That could change, however. For Ukraine, they've fought hard for 8 months to seize the initiative from the Russians in its war. They'll want to continue to use the momentum and use the winter as an opportunity to continue seizing back their territory. There will be challenges, though. The cold saps the energy from soldiers faster than in warmer conditions. Warm weather clothing, hot food, and protection from the elements are key to preserving a military force. Vehicle mobility is problematic. Wheeled vehicles in particular struggle in cold and boggy conditions, and this will have an impact on the logistic support for both sides. Tracked vehicles, however, have superior mobility in such conditions. Concealment, so for example, some of the wheeled ones like the Caesar ranged long range artillery is wheeled, so great on the roads, can just drive down the roads really quickly, rock up. Certain HIMARS as well will rock up, shoot their load, and then go away again, shoot and scoot. That might be more difficult in the winter, but it depends how much access they have to paved roads. Concealment in winter is difficult. Foliage disappears, and green colours that most military vehicles are painted makes them stand out against the stark white of the snow. The heat of humans and equipment stands out more against a cold environment. This is if they're using sort of heat sensor equipment. There are many other tactical impacts. The problem is, I do have multiple sclerosis, and not only does that affect the way that I sometimes struggle to find words, but I can't feel my fingers. So my fingers end up pressing things that most normal people wouldn't. But I'm not normal, so sorry about that. Making up for this, however, is that flying in winter months can be more challenging for both crewed and autonomous aerial vehicles. So yeah, certain UAVs, certain drones just can't operate in freezing temperatures up in the sky. And in fact, the Orlan 10 and the Orlan 30, the Russian low-tech drones are actually pretty good at operating in such cold temperatures. So the Russians may have an advantage there, not only with the range of their equipment, the drones that they use, those petrol drones, but also the fact that they don't freeze so much. There are many other tactical impacts of cold weather on military operations, but as historical examples such as the Battle of the Bulge, the Winter War, Shoisin Reservoir, and the more recent conflict around Siachen Glacier demonstrate winter does not shut down wars. The Ukrainians, who have been clever strategists and tacticians throughout this war, may take the advice of Finns from the Winter War. They found that it was not sufficient to adapt to the harsh geography. Rather, the goal should be to develop new forms of operational art that enable one to leverage that same geography against an ill-adapted foe. We may see more adaptations by the Ukrainians to use winter to their advantage. Regardless, Ukraine and Russia will continue to pursue their war aims throughout the winter, albeit at a lower tempo. There is a final salutary lesson when making comparisons between Ukraine in 2022 and Finland in 1939. The Winter War of 1939 to 40 was actually the beginning of a longer conflict between Finland and the Soviet Union. Known as a continuation war, this conflict lasted until September 1944 and resulted in over 1 million dead, wounded, and missing between the belligerents. It is an uncomfortable scenario, but one possible future for the current war. So thank you to Mick Ryan for that really good analysis. So what have I got to say about other aspects of this conflict? Within a few weeks, Ukraine will have received the first 10 American Switchblade 600 drones. Defense Minister Reznikov has told Politico. The Switchblade is classed as a loitering munition, a quiet hybrid of reconnaissance drone and attack warhead. So these are made by an American company, AeroVironment, the Switchblade. They were much lauded at the beginning of the conflict when America said they're sending a whole bunch of Switchblade. They were the Switchblade 300s, which really only attack humans. They're not very good against armored vehicles. They don't have a sufficient enough warhead, and they've got a very sort of small range. They don't stay in the air particularly long. They're sort of fired up from these mortars. They're quite easy to carry around. That's a great thing. Fire them up, these wings pop out, and then you fly them for 10 minutes. These are the 300s. You fly for 10 minutes, and then you've got, I think, about 10 minutes to find your target and then hit the target. Switchblade 600 are heavier, bigger. It can be set up in about 10 minutes and designed to fly for around 40 kilometers, 25 miles, which is in 20 minutes, then loiter for another 20 minutes. So they've got slightly greater range and flying time. and they have a bigger warhead, so they can, neutralize armored vehicles. It's based on the warhead of the Javelin. Um, uh, so there you go. A touchscreen tablet-based fire control system can manually or autonomously control the munition. It is secured through the onboard encrypted data links, with GPS, and they use that to basically lock onto a target and then fly in and blow itself up. It's a kamikaze drone, as you've seen, but it was as I said at the beginning of the war, people talked about this a lot as a game changer, and then nothing was really heard about it since. The 300, it wasn't potent enough, and I think might have had some technical difficulties as well. Okay, moving on. But it is great news. Great news. The 600 is being given to the Ukrainians. Also, actually, they've upped the to continue on this, they have upped their manufacturing capacity, which is great. So they can now make I can't find where it is, but they've upped their manufacturing capacity. They can make way more a year, and that means that they can promise these to here you go. In October 2022, AeroVironment said it was capable of producing more than 2,000 Switchblade 600 systems annually, and it planned within a few months to increase production capacity to 6,000 per year. Now, the only reason they want to gear up to make that many is if A, they're selling them to lots of countries, but B, really it's all about Ukraine at the moment. Okay. Russia is officially moved to a wartime economy, which means that they can basically use any of their manufacturing or any of their businesses for the purposes of the war. So the government has that ability to do that. Now, I talked the other day about martial law, and it wasn't really reported big time in the news, but they've actually introduced loads of martial law restrictions for all of Russia itself, but also the areas closest to Ukraine have got even tighter laws, and this is just a sign of things to come. And this falls into that kind of move. It's a wartime economy. Putin has said that the country was facing serious challenges and that the economy was under unprecedented restrictions, all of which required a complete overhaul of how the state is run. Quote, life pushes us to update all procedures, all administrative procedures, everything that is associated with what is called governance in the broadest sense of the word. This also concerns the economy as a whole, certain sectors of production, the armed forces, provision of special military operation, some might call war, with everything necessary, and so on. So all issues, he said, must be resolved more quickly and efficiently, even if this requires changes to existing procedures. If we work within the framework of standard bureaucratic procedures, hiding behind formalities, we will not get the desired results in any direction. So in other words, he's basically anything in Russia can be put towards national defense. As I said, this move follows Russia's imposition of martial law in occupied Ukrainian territories and a high alert mode in the Russian regions neighboring Ukraine. That's what I was talking about the other day, and that's really important. Well worth going back to watch my video on that, because it's a massively important change in how Russia is operating. And it gives them additional powers and power structures and local authorities to basically mobilize and do things on a war footing. Okay, Russians, just to add to how draconian the Russian system is becoming, we see further. It's all about freedom, isn't it, really, and the lack of freedom. So here, Russia's parliament has adopted a draft law prohibiting the propaganda of LGBT people, paedophilia, and gender reassignment. It's all throwing this all together into one big pot to demonize anything that's outside of the perceived norm. Among the wording is a ban on the issuance of rental certificates for films with LGBT propaganda. Just another small way that Putin emulates his hero Hitler. So these are really indicative moves to just shut down the freedom within Russia, such that it is becoming a completely totalitarian state, the likes of which we saw, decades and decades ago. Massive piece of reporting here from the Reuters, really worth reading. In fact, I'll put the link to this in the description. Abandoned Russian base holds secrets of retreat in Ukraine. I won't be able to go through this. It's just too big. But basically, what happened is in Balakliia, if you remember, in the kind of approach to Izium, Liman, and the lightning counter-offensive, Balakliia was a place that was overrun. And it held lots of secrets to how the Russians were operating and how things were going. There were loads of papers and journals that were half burnt in a bunker sort of stove, and these have been looked at by Reuters, and they've done a report on this, which is absolutely fascinating to read, talking about how the command and control was poor, how people had low morale, how just stuff was just going wrong all over the shop, that their supplies were poor. It just gives you a real insight into the Russian command structure, but also the Russian military project and how it operates on the ground. And then, of course, huge amounts of evidence of torture. There have been lots of people that have now been interviewed recently on how they were tortured in places like this, and it's pretty harrowing reading. So discussions of the chain of command, discussions of torture there. It shows what people were getting paid. Person noting down in their journal just the stuff that was happening all around them, and what was being hit where and what was happening here and there. Just really fascinating insights, and what was happening to different commanders as they were getting moved, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I would really advise you read that. It's very, very good piece of reporting there from Reuters. Okay, I talked yesterday about how an enlistment office was hit in Russia with firebombed, and then a second factory in Perm was on fire after a gunpowder one. This is a chemical plant, and then I was called out by some bloke who I think I'd had previous with in my philosophy sort of work years ago. I can't remember him, but he seems to have had a right pop at me for saying, well, he seems to be rather anti-me or pro-Russia or both, and saying that what's your baseline stats for how do you know that these fires are just not an anomaly or not part of the usual statistics? There are just people are now talking about these fires. Okay, fair point. At the basis, that is actually a fair point. But when you start presenting video evidence of people using Molotov cocktails, when you're looking at railway relay stations being set on fire purposefully, when you're seeing 54 firebomb attacks since February the 24th on enlistment offices, and then you're saying, okay, then there are all these warehouses. Okay, some of these could be accidental fires. Russia has a really bad history of accidental fires. It really does. It's got very low fire health, fire safety history. It's got a very, very poor history of stuff catching fire. But you start putting all these things together. So talk about the forest fires that happen in the summer. Usually it's conscripted soldiers that work, that's part of their job in peacetime, is to put out the fires of forest fires. Well, they couldn't do that because they were on the front line. So the forest fires were raging. They had a big forest fire problem. We know that we've got these people using Molotov cocktails, and there are all these factories that appear to be like starting, appear to be catching fire in dubious circumstances, but they could just be anomalies. Okay, well, there's a Wikipedia page of 2022 Russian mystery fires showing that right across Russia there are loads of places that are catching fire, and this is just a tiny list. I mean, it says it's a dynamic list, but it's just not complete at all. Oil depots, railway bridges, fuel depots, military air bases, ammunition depots, power plants, gunpowder plants, and then you get things like textbook warehouses, industrial zones, military enlistment offices, aviation colleges, military installation, chemical plants. And a lot of these chemical plants, there are claims that these plants are actually being used for creating military stuff. So some things that may seem like typical industrial things are actually being used for the military, so on and so forth. All this plastic chip depot warehouse, television and radio tower, electricity substations, all this kind of stuff. You're thinking, okay, this could just be random. I don't know that it's sabotage, but I think I've got a fairly good rationale to think that at least some of these are sabotage. So when I then report on them like this, yeah, this could be accident. but it could also be very well be sabotage. Make up your own mind. I'm not telling you what it definitely is, but we've got pretty good reason to think that to suspect that sabotage is at play here. Anyway, moving on. Recently, a lot of repaired Panzerhowitzer 2000. So Panzerhowitzer 2000 are the longest range, best self-propelled guns. So these are big pieces of artillery that are on wheels or tracks. The Panzerhowitzer 2000 is, I think, tracked, and it has a really long range. But the problem was they had some technical problems with them, also some issues with them, so that they had to be recalled to get fixed either in Poland or Germany. Apparently, these are coming back onto the battlefield now, and the idea they're definitely being used around Bakhmut. Here's video evidence of this, and it could be that the success in Bakhmut might at least partially be down to the Panzerhowitzer 2000s returning to the field, and these with their great capabilities that they have. So that's something to think about. As I say, definitely being used around the Bakhmut region, and the Ukrainians have made some successful counterattacks around there. Okay, moving on. Bushmaster, so 30 of these have been promised by Australia, with 70 instructors going to the UK to train Ukrainian military. So the Ukrainian military are being trained in the UK, it seems. That's a continuing thing. There was like 10,000 and then maybe another 10,000 who were trained. But I think there's training just going on all the time in maybe specialized areas. I'm not sure about the whole huge 10,000 cohort thing. I'd have to look into that. But Bushmaster being deployed to Ukraine, again, these are pretty decent pieces of kit, and I know that Australians have been like, yay, whenever they see a Bushmaster, because they're happy to see that their country is providing assistance to Ukraine. Great to see them being provided useful bits of kit. APCs, armored personnel carriers, but a pretty resistant piece of kit. Okay, here, why I find this interesting. So two Russian, two S5 Gyatsints, self-propelled guns were targeted and reportedly destroyed by two high-precision GMLRS strikes from HIMARS of the Ukrainian army. Okay, so if the HIMARS are hitting two guns like this, this tells us quite a lot. Back when HIMARS first came onto the scene, there was certain, I think War in Ukraine, the channel there, was quite critical of how HIMARS were being used. They were being used to hit ammunition depots and command and control posts. And he was saying that they should be used to hit the actual artillery, because it's the artillery that's doing the damage. You need to take out the artillery. These rockets are expensive, and they had a certain amount of them. So the Ukrainians decided to primarily hit the depots full of ammunition, so that the artillery, even if you had lots of these artillery pieces, they didn't have the artillery, the ammunition, the ordnance to fire. So that's what HIMARS have been doing. Some people favour that approach, other people favour the war in Ukraine approach. Okay. It seems like HIMARS have taken out so many depots and command and control posts, and that the depots have been moved back beyond the HIMARS range, which is about 84 kilometers, that now the HIMARS are being forced to choose other targets. So this, to me, is indicative of HIMARS being used to hit the artillery on the ground. Now, although this might be an expensive way of doing that, rather than using artillery that's got longer range than these bits of artillery to take them out, they are using HIMARS rockets. This is also going to be really useful, because not only are they short on the ground of ammunition, particularly around the Kherson area, if they're hitting the artillery, then this is a sign that the HIMARS scope of targets has changed, and in fact you will start getting more and more pieces of artillery taken out, degrading. So remember, I told you that every single week the Russian capability is degrading, not only their capacity but capability. So they are not getting better stuff provided to them, or even more. There's a few bits of kit coming from Belarus, but realistically every week is a degradation of the Russian capability. But every week the Ukrainians arguably get more and better stuff from NATO, and this gradual shift will see could arguably you might see a tipping point where Russia just start falling apart. Now, we thought we'd seen that up in Kharkiv, we thought we'd seen that in Kherson, but the gaps are maybe being plugged with mobilized soldiers. They're getting stuff from Belarus. They're trying to get as much as they can, but that is a short-term solution to a very big problem that the Russians just have continued degradation of their capability, and nothing can change that if Russia can't get hold of a shed load of better kit. Can they get hold of a shed load of better kit? It doesn't look like it. They can't make it because of sanctions. They can't buy it from other people because of sanctions. And people like China don't want to be seen to support Ukraine here so openly. So they have been a bit standoffish. And I was talking about this in the discussion with Tim White the other day. It could be that China actually kind of want Russia to get done over. If Russia get completely, debilitated in this war, even though ideologically China are on the same kind of page as Russia, there's going to be people in China thinking we can really take advantage of Russia. They got loads of natural resources. A lot of the eastern part of Russia, there's argument that China really want that. People in Russia have been worried that Russia have been becoming increasingly a vassal state of China. There's every reason to think China won't want to give really big hardware support to Russia because they want Russia to lose so that they can be the ones that come to pick up the pieces of Russia. And the huge capacity and capability economically in terms of natural resources that Russia have. I think China are going to want to have their fingers in every Russian pie. Okay, last thing to say, in Kherson, Russians are looting, even taking out double glazed windows and office chairs. We've seen that they've taken down statues there, and they've even exhumed some bones of some very important person. There's also claims that they are taking out really expensive equipment from radiation wings or from oncology hospitals in the area as well. So things are looking bad for Kherson just being looted. As if, again, it comes back to the same point. If you're supportive of Russia, do you support this? Do you actually support this? Do you support Russia stealing radiation equipment from hospitals that support the most vulnerable in society, those suffering from cancer? I mean, if that's what you support, then I don't know. We can't be friends. I'm pretty sure of that, because your moral radar is just, or your moral compass is completely skewed. Anyway, there you go. That's just my end of video rant. Thanks for all your support. Please like, subscribe, share. A lot of my videos are getting ad restrictions at the moment. I don't really know why. I don't put anything dodgy on them. I don't show people dying. I don't glorify war. In fact, I'm trying to say war is bad, and here's the reason why it's bad. Hence this, right? But yeah, because I'm getting ad restrictions, it makes things a little bit difficult. So any help would be gratefully received. All the details are in the descriptions box below, or if you want to buy some stash, hop on to uasupporter.com/ATP. And if you are, take for example, let's go for a man. If you're a man, you can even buy a jacket that supports Ukraine and shows your support for Ukraine. Here it all is. Check it out. I get a tiny bit of commission for everything that's bought on there. So using /ATP. Anyway, thanks for your support. You take care, and I will speak to you later tomorrow.